This is Curious Minnesota, a Star Tribune project that sends staff from the state's largest newsroom hunting for the answers to great questions we receive from you, our readers. We're here to answer everything you want to know about the state's people, places, and culture.
Welcome to Curious Minnesota. I'm your host, Eric Roper. Today's episode of Curious Minnesota is sponsored by Primrose Schools and the Minnesota Historical Society. We're talking today about a question that arose during our annual State Fair Curious Minnesota event last year. Ryan Peterson stopped by the Minnesota Star Tribune's building with an intriguing question. Here's what he asked us.
I was curious to know, what is the smallest town in Minnesota with a mayor?
Now, there's obviously a very technical way to answer this question. You know, we could call some public official and just get the answer and then write up a description of this town. But I think that what we really want to know, and what kind of occurred to me upon hearing the question, was, you know, what's life like in the tiniest of Minnesota towns? You know, who are the characters? What are the quirks? How are these places evolving? And two reporters in our Greater Minnesota bureaus, Kim Hyatt and J.P. Lawrence, did a great job delivering exactly that in a story for Curious Minnesota. Their story, which I'll link to in the show notes, painted a fascinating picture of this interesting slice of rural Minnesota life. Kim and JP are joining me on the podcast today, but before we get to our conversation, here's a bit more from Ryan.
I have a grandfather who, at one time, he was a mayor of a small town in South Dakota. You know, in a small town, everybody knows each other, but then there's somebody who was elected mayor, and it's like, well, that must create some sort of fun drama sometimes. If there's a race or if there's some sort of, you know, bias for one person versus another or something like that. So I was like, oh, I wonder in Minnesota, what's the smallest town where there's an elected mayor, and maybe it's caused some controversy over the years or what have you.
Thanks to Ryan for that question. Here's Kim and JP. Thanks so much for joining us today. I thought this was such a charming story. So tell us first about what you do at the paper. You are all part of our Greater Minnesota team. So where are you located? That's probably the most important thing, because that's the area that you cover.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. So JP and I are part of the Greater Minnesota team, and we both report for the Minnesota Star Tribune from our small hometowns. So I'm in LaPorte, which is just south of Bemidji, and JP is down in his hometown.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I'm from Redwood Falls, Minnesota. It's one of those small towns where you got to put it in relation to something. So I'm about an hour west of Mankato. I cover everything from Mankato to Worthington and then up to Wilmer, the southwest corner of the state.
All right, so we got this question at the state fair, and then how did this sort of come to be that you all were working on this story? Because you were not the original reporters on the story. How did this all develop?
I had a colleague reach out to me because they were exchanging emails with the state demographer, trying to figure out what was the smallest town with a mayor. And in those exchanges, it seemed to be pretty sure that it was Funkley. And so the story was then tossed to me to look into. And I set up my interviews with the mayor and other city officials and residents, because every resident is a city official there. And in the process of doing that, I reached out to some other small towns, calling their mayor up just to make sure that they didn't have fewer than 13 people living in town. And in the process of doing that, I called up the mayor of Kinbrae and found out that they too had 13 people in town. And so the plot thickened a little bit, and I reached out to JP as we were approaching deadline pretty quickly, and I was talking with one of the editors, Erica, and I was like, what do we do? You know, there's a tie. And she's like, well, this just makes the story more interesting. You should reach out to JP and, you know, see if he can contribute to the story. And then so we just decided that we would make it about, you know, both of these small towns, with one of them sort of having an edge on the other of being the smallest because of some people moving out.
Got it. And so before we get into the specifics of those towns, the story said, based on state demographer Susan Brower, that just under 6,000 people in the state live in a city with a population less than 100. So we're talking about small segment of the state. And then within that, there are some towns that are ranking among the smallest, and it sounds like it's a bit fluid because literally if there's, so few people, I mean, in this case, 13 people, then 1 or 2 people leaving can make a big difference. JP, tell us where these towns are. We're going to be talking mostly about Funkley and Kinbrae, although the town of Barrie got an honorable mention in the story. I should just point that out. So let's lay of the land here. Where are we? Where are these places?
No, Kinbrae is about 20 minutes north of Worthington in the southwest corner of the state. It's next to a lake, and it's next to a lot of prairie.
Yeah, and Funkley is about 30 miles north of Bemidji en route to Red Lake, Upper and Lower, as well as Lake of the Woods. So it was known to hunters and anglers who were heading north for the weekend. They would often go by Funkley.
Got it. And looks like Barrie is on the western edge of the state, but Barrie is not the smallest town, but it was like one of the smallest. Is that right?
Yeah, it was close to being one of the smallest.
But it's where the Lake Traverse is and that area over there. So these are, we keep calling these towns. These are actually cities, which are different than townships. Can you give us like a real quick explanation of that? Because we just want to make that quick distinguishment before we get into the details.
Sure. Cities and towns are both forms of local government, and there's no official rule or threshold that a community has to reach to be a township or a city. And often it comes down to like size and whether or not residents feel so strongly about keeping their local government to avoid annexation of an encroaching city.
Got it. Okay. So JP, tell us about going to Kinbrae. So it's near Worthington. What was the sort of circumstances of going through Kinbrae?
Yeah, no, I happened to be in Worthington at the time when I got word that, there's this story about the unofficial title of the smallest town in the state. I was talking with the Mayor Nick Carlson, off and on, and I decided, like, hey, let's come in and drive to see the town. It's only about 20 minutes north of Worthington. So when I drove in, I come in and I drive through the town. It doesn't take very long. It's about 3 blocks. And, the first thing I saw on the other side of the town was a road sign that said minimum maintenance road, drive at your own risk. So that was pretty encouraging. I locked on a few doors before I found Mayor Nick. I'm not ashamed that I was a bit lost, in this town of about 20 buildings, but I finally found him, and I parked next to City Hall, which is like the small brick building with no heating, and I went to Mayor Mick's auto body shop. So the whole time I was talking to him, just know that he was working on a Chevy Tahoe that had gotten too much dust in it from driving on the dirt roads.
Oh, okay.
He was the mayor. He's also the snowplow driver, and he also runs the only business in town, that auto repair shop in the former post office.
And we actually have a little audio of your conversation with Nick.
I've been mayor for 4 years now. I took over when everybody else didn't want to do it anymore. Every election cycle, there's 2 people up for vote. This last election cycle, we had a couple sell their house and leave, so we lost a councilman. And the new guy that bought the house, his name is Danny Peterson. He said he would be happy to help with being a councilor. So we got him on the ballot, and then I was up for re-election. So me and Danny both won 100% of our vote at 2 votes, which was just me and my wife. Because apparently nobody else voted in town.
Okay, and then you write in the story that this town has an unofficial historian, which leads me to wonder, is there more to say about the history of Kinbrae? And then you reveal that there was more. So what else can we say about what used to be in Kinbrae?
So Randy, the unofficial town historian, actually came into Mayor Nick's auto body shop as we were speaking. He just retired. He likes going on, a walk around town twice a day. It takes about 20 minutes. It's not that long. But, he's been in town for about 55 years, he says. He remembers when the town was much bigger, when it was booming. There was 55 or so people back in the day. As far as he remembers, there used to be a steakhouse in town where people would go from miles around, sometimes even 100 people at a time to get steak in Kinbrae.
Wow. And you note that like part of the more recent story of Kinbrae is that someone tried to turn that restaurant into a residence, but then is leaving the town. And this is how Kinbrae, between when you wrote the story and now, has become the smallest town that we know of in the state.
Yes, I talked to this woman, Felicia. She and her boyfriend moved into Kinbrae from Roswell, New Mexico in 2023. They were hoping to fix up the steakhouse as a residence. However, renovating that aging restaurant was way more difficult, more expensive than expected. So they moved out, which would, according to Mayor Nick, probably give Kinbrae the unofficial title of smallest town.
Interesting. I like how this is, it is hard to track who has the title because it changes, it can change based on almost anything. If someone, passes away or moves away or someone moves in. We'll be right back.
At Primrose, our balanced learning approach means exploring academic skills and life skills, combining purposeful play with nurturing guidance from teachers, and setting children up for success in future classrooms. Learn more at primroseschools.com/Twin Cities.
History doesn't only exist in the pages of a book. History exists all around us. You just have to dare to look. Listen to Minnesota Unraveled, a podcast from the Minnesota Historical Society. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, so Kim, Funkley, did you just drive in or how did you make your connections and who were you connecting with?
Yeah, so I went to Funkley. Actually, I was doing some reporting in Red Lake that day. It was a breaking news situation where I was going to meet with the mayor earlier in the day and then had to go to Red Lake and then ended my day in Funkley hanging out at the bar, now his residence. So he's been the mayor. Emil Erickson has been the mayor for over a decade now, and he ran the bar in town, but they closed it in 2017, and now it's their house where he lives with his wife, Carrie. And so I met there with those two and then their friend and city clerk, Keith. It seems like most residents also serve on the city council. If you live there, then you're probably expected to help out with city business too. And Keith runs the only business in town now, which is a greenhouse, the Funkley greenhouse. So.
When I was reading this story, I came down to the picture of the mayor and his wife, Carrie, and the city clerk, and they're standing in the old Funkley bar, and the mayor has on a cowhide vest.
It's amazing.
Which is very striking, and I just love everything about it. I don't know why.
It screams northern Minnesota to me with like the log building, and so you can see like all the neon signs and the Funkley bar sign, like it's this, the signage that was outside of this bar forever, and it's all inside, nothing outside. But that doesn't mean people don't stop by thinking that the bar is still open, because it was sort of this place for decades where people going up north would stop along the way to get a beer, and they still stop by hoping to have a beer with Emil. Mm-hmm. And sometimes he still entertains those people stopping by, but otherwise they need to stop by to help pull their car out from the ditch because I got stuck in the snow. So
and we have a little audio here of Carrie Erickson and city clerk Keith Carcella talking about what it's like.
Nice, quiet, small town atmosphere.
It really is. He ran the bar up until 2017 in February, which is when we closed it. When he got the place, he said, if I don't make this go, then it will never be a bar again. It's going to be a house. And that's what we did when we closed it.
Do people still stop by and come knocking on your door?
They don't knock. They just walk in and we're like, can I help you?
And we should note, if we haven't already, that both of these towns have about 13 people, although as we've noted, this is a number that changes, right? Like there's some fluctuation.
Yeah, it's definitely dynamic. It was 13 a tie at the time of writing the story, and now that the supper club couple moved out of Kinbrae, I believe that would make it the smallest town in Minnesota unofficially, but it could change. And I think it's something, that can be an evolving story that we keep up with because it's not something that you can Google. The census data is stale. And to really know how many people live in these communities and what it's like to live in these communities, you have to go there and talk to these people and hear the head count. When you call up these small towns and talk to the mayors to figure out what is the smallest in the beginning of reporting the story, and you literally hear them go 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're counting it out, and they're up until about 15 or so, and it cuts off at that point. But they're picturing the people in their community, and they know each and every one of them to come up with their head count, their population. It's more of a head count than a population in these communities because they're so small.
Yeah. And do some of these small cities, do they ever decide to no longer be a city?
Yeah, dissolution is rare, but it does happen. And sometimes attempts to dissolve a city are shot down by residents who are so nostalgic and sentimental about their town that they could not possibly get rid of their identity. And so we've had a couple examples in recent years of towns voting to dissolve. Tenney, which was the teeniest town in Minnesota for a long time. It sort of went back and forth between Funkley and Tenney, which is why readers might be familiar with Funkley because we've written about this town before.
And you say in the story, the vote to dissolve Tenney was a 2-to-1 vote, like 3 people.
Right. And in that case, it's just like you have 3 people who are responsible for hosting monthly city council meetings, elections. It's like at some point, the resources might outweigh the benefit of maintaining a local form of government for a community of 3 people. But a lot of times, communities don't want to dissolve and be annexed by a neighboring township or city. They would rather keep their own identity than dissolve. So it all comes down to a vote. You can't just dissolve without the residents approving of it.
So, JP, and you spoke to Mayor Nick and Kinbrae, who said that they were talking about dissolving, but then they didn't.
Kinbrae actually considered dissolving in 2009, I believe. It was up for discussion, but the town decided to stay incorporated. I asked Mayor Nick about it, and he said that he doesn't see the town dissolving anytime soon. They have a town dumpster, and they also have the street lights also come out of everyone's taxes. So if, they got rid of the town or unincorporated, he said you kind of lose everything. You'd have to put up your own power pole with a light on it, and you'd have to get your own dumpster. So those are the 2 things that he said that, come with being a city. And I will say that Mayor Nick is hoping that Kinbrae is going to be growing soon. There's a house with an unfinished basement down the street from his home. When the family moves in sometime in June-ish, maybe in the summer, he's expecting that Kinbrae's population will grow by at least 3 people. There's audio.
And then would lose the title.
He said, it's going to knock us out of the small town kind of running.
Right. Wow. I love it. Well, JP and Kim, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Again, I just enjoyed this story so much. So thank you all. Okay, that's it for today's show. Before we sign off, I wanted to give a shout out to listener John Zierden, who contacted us after hearing our recent episode on custom license plates. John is a member of the Minnesota Frisbee Association, which is turning 50 years old this year. John was at an event with some founding members of the Frisbee Association, and they realized that 3 of their cars sported custom Frisbee-themed license plates. He sent us a fun picture that I'll link to in the show notes of them standing next to the cars. The plates say Disc Golf, Fly Disc, and Frisbee. Very cool. Thank you so much for writing in, John. And thanks, as always, to Matt Gilmer for editing this podcast. Got a question for us or feedback about this show? Send us a note at curious@startribune.com. And if you're enjoying this show, please tell a friend about it. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Curious Minnesota. We want to hear from you. Ask questions and read more stories online at startribune.com/curious. Our show is recorded at the Star Tribune's headquarters in beautiful downtown Minneapolis, and our music is produced by Matt Gilmer. If you like the show, please rate us on iTunes or leave a review. And until next time, stay curious.